All right, welcome everybody. We're getting into the last ever presentation for finance. This is an HL only topic, budgets. So once again, this is the very end of all the finance unit. It's not terribly complicated. I'm going to try and go through it a little bit quickly. So what is a budget? It's a financial plan of any expected revenue and expenditure. So money coming in or spending going out for a department or an organization, and it's over a period of time. So when you're a business, you want to see roughly how much are you going to be earning and how much do you need to spend, and then you allocate a budget, a target, to make sure that you don't overspend. So it's kind of an interesting concept. Budgeting is really essential for managing an organization. You need them especially when you're about to grow, because when you grow, you tend to do a lot more expenditure. So you buy more equipment, more items, more facilities, you might hire more staff. So without having a good budget, you might accidentally overcommit to something that you can't really afford. They also need to be set in line with the aims of the business. So if the aims of the business is to be very lean and not have a lot of assets, then you want a lower budget. If you're going all guns blazing, you want to be a market leader, the big dog, then obviously you need higher budgets for that, more marketing and stuff like that. So usually they're prepared monthly, quarterly, or annually. Those are the frequency. Now, sometimes you come under budget, and that can actually cause its own set of issues. And there's also ethical considerations. There's a really cool clip from The Office, the US Office, I want to show you guys that sort of explains some of the decisions that managers have to look into and make sometimes, and how it can impact people. So the premise behind this is that in The Office, this paper company, Michael Scott, he came under budget. So when you're under budget, you kind of as a manager have to spend all the money, otherwise you risk the shareholders giving you less budget next year. So they're like, oh look, you came under budget, great, we'll just give you less next year because clearly we over budgeted you. So managers tend to spend it all even if they didn't urgently need it, because they don't want to get their budget cut for the next year. So Michael Scott had an option to either buy a new photocopier or a bunch of chairs, because both of those were really needed by the office. Let's see what happens. Okay. Sorry. Having some technical issues here.
Yeah, we have that going
There
on
we go.
Tuesday. Okay. Sure. No, I'll double check that for you.
All right, attention everyone.
Let me call you right back. Okay.
I have made my decision. We do not need a new copier. We do not need new chairs. This copier is working perfectly.
That's the original.
Pam, would you stand up for a sec? See how relaxed I am? I like this chair. Offers good support. It is ergonomically correct. It's a good chair. I think we're spoiled because we don't appreciate the things that we have. You think kids in Africa have chairs? No. They sit in big piles of garbage. Do you think they have copiers? They don't have copiers. They don't even have paper. And we are spoiled because we throw out perfectly good tiramisu because it has a little tiny hair on it. My point is this. I've seen the light in terms of what we need, and it is nothing.
Do you know?
Do I know what?
I think you know.
No.
Know what? Yeah, know what?
Does anyone happen to know what 50% of 4,300 is?
$645.
Michael's a genius.
Right.
Why did you say dollars?
Because that is how my mind works.
What's 15% of 200? Thank you. Everyone, Michael is returning the surplus so he can keep 15% as a bonus.
Wait, what?
You can do that?
Hey, Michael, what's 394 times 5,912?
Let's see.
You're going to give yourself a bonus of $645 instead of getting the entire office something it really needs.
I don't need $645. I already have $645 more or less.
You're going to get us
This
a copy
is
of that.
stupid.
Then
Or
this
chairs.
is...
So stupid. And God, that's my phone.
I didn't hear a phone.
To be continued.
So, yeah, absolutely hilarious. So you can see there that Michael Scott pretty much screwed over his entire staff because he realized he can get 15. So whatever savings he made on the budget, he could get 15% of the budget as a bonus. So there are a lot of ethical issues that come up with budgets because obviously the shareholders want the costs to be lower so they get more profit, more dividends, right? But staff want you to spend that budget on things that make their job easier and motivate them. So a whole bunch of interesting stuff can come out of budgets, whether QGIS wise or ethics wise or whatever. There's a lot of different types of budgets. You can have flexible budgets where you kind of take it one day at a time. You can have incremental budgets where you slowly increase them year on year. You can set marketing budgets, production budgets, so you can separate them, sales budgets according to the different departments. And then zero budgeting is pretty much where you just have a big pot of money and just spend it until it runs out. And you don't really track, okay, how much of that money has been spent by sales, how much by marketing, how much by... Which, if you're a small enough firm, you probably can get away with it. But when you're a big company, you probably definitely need to break it up into different budgets. So there's a lot of importance in budgets. During the planning stage, when you're budgeting, there's a few questions you have to ask yourself. How much should you spend on marketing activities in the upcoming year? Because remember, usually they're done for a whole year. How many workers do you need for that year? How much money will be set aside in case for emergencies, contingency funds, excuse me. So these are the types of things that help you, because remember, if you just set your budget perfect and then something, all hell breaks loose, machinery breaks you weren't expecting to break down, and you don't have that extra bit, you might be in a lot of trouble. So you have to factor all these things into your budget. If you know it's going to be a slow year, maybe you lower the marketing bit, or if you know it's going to be a heavy year, hire more staff, get more desks, supplies, so it really just depends on your company. Those questions will then let you allocate different budgets to the different departments in your business, whether it is marketing, finance, operations, or IT, wherever. They can also let you provide some guidance for managers and budget holders when they make their decisions. So then they can figure out, oh, can I actually get another receptionist? Oh, no, we're already over budget. No way in hell. That's just kind of the example. It is important because it enables managers to control the money in the firm instead of the money controlling the firm itself, right? So when you know how much you have, you can then make decisions ahead of time. Budget helps the entire workforce focus on common goals. It can be very motivating when everyone knows what level they can spend and what to expect. Without really good budget control, the budget holders might make decisions that conflict with other departments. So, for example, if you have finance who are really trying to cut spending, and then you have the marketing team buying tons of advertising and stuff, that's going to completely undermine the finance directives. So it needs to be coordinated. It needs to be centrally managed so that everyone knows the big picture. It can help you control your expenses because, once again, cash flow, we've already seen how devastating poor cash flow can be on a company. A lot of businesses who don't set a budget end up overspending. So they just spend more because they're not tracking it as they go. And it's even the same in a household too. If you don't sometimes make a budget, sometimes you run out of your salary really early in the month because you haven't, and then you've got your due bill and your rent check and you haven't paid those yet and you're in big trouble. So budgeting, it's not really just on a business level, it can be on a personal level too. So budget holders are constrained by what they can do, so they can't just kind of buy anything. They're then held accountable. So every dollar they spend, they have to justify it. So it can prevent the business from going into debt when you have this system. So the motivational aspects of it, and once again, Hertzberg, we haven't gone into this yet because we skipped over Unit 2, but Hertzberg, there's a motivation theory that says that the more you allow the participation of employees, so for example, you give them a budget and say, this is how much you can spend, now you make decisions up to this amount of dollars, it can be quite good because you're involving them instead of just making them come beg for you every time they need a small little purchase. When you delegate budget controls, it can boost, their morale, make them feel trusted and valued. When you involve staff in the budgeting too, it promotes teamwork, and teamwork is an example of a non-financial motivation. When you work in teams, you get more motivated, you're happier. So even if you're not getting paid more, you might work better. And then it makes you more productive and less likely to call in sick, absenteeism. Once again, this is stuff in Unit 2 that we haven't actually gone over, but we'll get into it in the future. The budget control can also help you delegate responsibility. So who's in charge of what, according to which budgets they're in charge of. So in summary, the four main purposes of budgets is to provide benefits that lead to organizational and operational efficiency. That just makes you more efficient. You're having to make sure it's realistic, encourage managers to make sure that they're eliminating wastage pretty much in the process. And then it gives you a competitive advantage over rivals. If you're not wasting, you then have more money to spend in the future. If you need it, you can beat out the competitors if they're overspending or they're not being if they're advertising way too much when it's not really actually helping, and then they're not able to buy that brand new machine, which makes their production faster. Got it? Remember, it's all about opportunity costs. What are you sacrificing from one expenditure to another? So once again, what do you consider when you're setting a budget? Well, how much money you have, obviously. So the finance available. Historical data. So how much did you spend last year? That can help you figure out what you spend this year. Organizational objectives. What are our objectives to grow or to stay the same and survive or even to shrink? That will change the amount of budget you need. Benchmarking is where you look at other competitors and see what are other people in our industry doing? How much are they spending? We should spend similar. And negotiations. So these are just different things that you consider when you're setting the total budget. There are limitations though, guys. It's not all, it sounds pretty cool so far, but so many things are unforeseen and that can impact your budget. So remember, you're guessing, but what if something does break down or you get a brand new order and all of a sudden you need more equipment than you thought you'd need or more supplies, raw materials. Managers also then tend to overestimate budgets because it makes it easier. So if you're setting high budgets just in case and then you don't need it, well, that's less stressful than setting a more accurate budget and then actually, at the end, I need a couple $1,000s more. So managers will tend to overestimate or inflate their budget just to make it easier for them to meet targets and not go over. Budgets are often not permitted to be carried forward next year. So if you're under budget, it doesn't mean that, you can spend more next year. Actually, as we saw in The Office, it could have the opposite impact. They might actually reduce your budget next year and say, hey, we overestimated the budget. Great, we're going to cut your budget next year. And that can really stress out managers. Budgets can be set by senior managers who actually aren't involved in the daily stuff. So they don't know how the photocopier is working and if it needs replacing or not. Because they're sitting in this fancy office. It's less useful for businesses that actually have seasonal fluctuations, because sometimes there's some businesses where there's nothing all year and then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes. So a budget is looked at as a whole year, but actually maybe in June and February you need a lot of advertising, but the rest of the year, nothing. And it doesn't take that into account. It's harder to predict and harder to really do a more accurate budget. And then sometimes if it's too rigid or you don't allocate right, you just put the wrong amount of money for different departments, it can actually harm the quality and make your business worse. They can be really time consuming, as you can imagine, to make. Imagine you're going through every department in your business and trying to allocate and guess and look at data. Since finance is limited, one department's gain ends up being another's loss. So when you increase someone's budget, opportunity costs, you're sacrificing another department, and that can cause fighting and conflict. Budgeting ignores qualitative factors too. It just looks at the numbers, right? But at the end of the day, there might be something more than just figures. That could be something like organizational objectives and things like that get hidden, or the community impact, or the impact on the environment, stuff like that. And the process of budgeting itself is inflexible. Next up, we have cost and profit centers. A cost center is a department or business that costs money pretty much, so it doesn't make profit, but it supports them. So cost centers are things like your HR department, your marketing department, where they're not actually selling or producing revenue, but they're costing money, but their activity ends up leading to the creation of revenue in the future. So a cost center is something that you create where you're only putting money into it, expenditure, there's no revenue. But it's really critical because without them, you're not going to then be able to create revenue in the different center, which is the profit center. That's the department or unit of business that incurs costs and revenues. So the profit center is responsible for making the overall profits in the business. So the bank, for example, might be split up into a profit center and a cost center, branch by branch. So you might have one office that's all just head office functions and not doing any business in the banks. And then other branches around the city that actually then make the money, sell loans, transactions, charge interest, things like that. Does that make sense? So understand the difference between cost and profit centers. Both are needed. There are advantages and disadvantages to cost and profit centers. I'm not going to read them out to you because I'm trying to make this video shorter. They're on page 320, or you can pause the video and read them there. I think that's fairly clear because my Samsung, which is the better phone, better than iPhone, took a really good picture here. Bow down. It's possible for businesses to operate from both profit and cost centers, all right? So just remember that they could have head offices, or they can just have actual operation places with no head office, so where they're only profit centers. It could be both. Next up, variance. So variance, you have a budget, right? That's like your target that you're trying to reach. But let's be honest, in the real world, we rarely hit perfectly that, especially when you're guessing a lot of the stuff and things change. So variance is the discrepancy or difference between the actual outcome and your budgeted outcome, between what you're targeting to get or expecting versus what then actually you ended up spending. So the variance is a very easy calculation. It's actual outcome minus budget outcome. So we talk about these not in terms of positive and negative, right? Because obviously if your actual is lower than your budgeted, it'll give you a negative number, but we don't say positive, negative. We talk about budgets in terms of favorable and adverse outcomes, or unfavorable, right? Good or bad outcomes. A favorable variance is when the discrepancies, there's a difference, right? You didn't budget correct, but in a good way. You budgeted higher and actually you had more money left over. So your actual expense was less than your budgeted. That's favorable, obviously. Hey, you got leftover money. Great, we're happy. So your sales are more than you thought you would sell. That's usually a good thing, right? Adverse variance is the opposite, where actually you're under what you expected. So the adverse aren't good because you're either underselling or underspending. You're not doing what your target was. And that tends to be a negative sign, a sign that your business isn't quite doing as well as you hoped for, or your planning was crap. Either way, it's not good. So by analyzing variances, not just like creating a budget, but actually then looking at the variance, whether it's favorable or adverse or unfavorable, managers then can monitor and control their budgets. It can provide like warnings if there's revenue dropping. So if you keep seeing unfavorable month on month in sales, maybe you need to do something different. You need to fix the product or advertise more or try and lower the cost, get cheaper suppliers, all of that stuff. Managers can implement measures to fix it or offset it so that those unfavorable variances the next month then become favorable again, or at least on target. Variance analysis really helps you review and revise your annual budgets so that the next year your budget is more accurate than the previous year. And it can be expressed in monetary terms or percentages. So it could be, what's the variance in terms of the dirham or dollar amount, or what percent off were you? Were you favorable 10% or unfavorable 10%, where you're under or over by 10% of the budget? Make sense? Yes, beautiful. A lot of candidates, this is a big mistake. They do find variance analysis a good planning tool. It's important to remember that variance analysis only refers to past data, because you can only calculate variance once the year is finished, right? While your budget is in the future, you set the budget in the future, but you can only do variance analysis on that budget when the year finished, and you'll see what was our actual sales versus our budget sales. What was our actual costs versus our budget costs? Does that make sense? So it's a tool that can only be used historically because it had to have happened to compare it. Adverse variances do not necessarily represent a bad situation. For example, sometimes your production costs or staff budget might have been lower just because you were more efficient, right? Maybe your sales were higher than you expected, so your suppliers started giving you discounts. So actually, your costs were adversely, they were lower than the budget costs, or your staffing was lower than your staffing because you thought you would need more than you did, but actually it became more efficient. So that's why we don't use positive and negative. We use these terms like adverse because we don't want you to just assume immediately it's bad or good. Normally, yeah, but don't always make that assumption. That's pretty much budget summed up. It's very simple, isn't it? You guys deal with budgets probably on a personal level, so it's not a foreign concept to us. For your homework, guys, I want you to take a look at this question in the book on laptops or us. It should hopefully cover most of the aspects of budget as well as variance analysis and stuff like that. I do have a little bit of revision slides here on the rest of it with some key terms. So look through those on your own. I'm not going to read them to you, as beautiful as my voice is, because we need to get this going. All right, guys, this is it for this week. I'm going to upload the homework task. You can do the cognitive readings on the side also, as well as a few cognitive questions. All of that should have you ready to go on 3.9. And then guess what? We done with finance, y'all. That's another 20% of the course done and dusted. Love it. Peace out, Sabs.